How you doing? Gonna do a little tour here today in, well, normally sunny, old Florida. I'm here in Clearwater. It's actually one of the 3 parts of Tampa Bay. I've already done Tampa and St. Pete, so I figured I'd tell you the story of Clearwater, but also of the Church of Scientology, which actually uses Clearwater as its headquarters and has kind of bought up a lot of downtown Clearwater as well. So it's a very interesting story. Before we start, Silvio, how are you doing?
Feeling great.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. A lot of enthusiasm. Good. And aside from that, if you've seen these before, guys, go ahead and join the Patreon or check the Patreon if you want. You don't have to join. Check it out. There's some extras on there. Also, like and subscribe. Right? Do it now. That way you don't have anything to do. Now, your to-do list is all checked off. Huh? So you just watch this and enjoy. Have your protein crisps or whatever you're eating over there at home. Let's do it. Silly, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. What the hell? It's our first stop. We gotta get going with this thing. Huh? Look at this. We're Clearwater Beach. One of the things that Clearwater is famous for. So we're gonna start at the beginning. Initially, the Tocobaga people were here as a Native American tribe. There are still mounds around in the vicinity that kind of harken back to their time here. By the way, I mentioned this in my St. Pete video. You can watch that one. All right. But one of the first people to come here was a man named Panfilo de Narvaez. Sorry, I'm just making sure we're not going to get towed. You know, we're just parked over there. So, anyways, Panfilo de Narvaez. He's a Spanish guy. He came here with 300 people. Right? They docked around here, and then he sent his boats up the coast to meet him further up. So they walked and they take all their stuff and they lose the boats. The boats eventually were like, "We're not finding this guy. Let's go back." They left. He's basically walking. He's like, "Crap, we're really screwed." So he just keeps walking. Eventually they're like, "Screw it, let's build some barges and go to Mexico." They build these barges, they capsize. He ends up going to this little island off of Texas. There's about 100 people left at this point. He ends up dying, shock. And then one of the people who was left was this man named Nunez de Cabeza de Vaca, Nunez Cowhead. And he's the guy who told the tale, lived to tell the tale, one of the few people who survived of those original 300. But he's the first guy. That was 1528. One of the people who read that tale was named Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto comes in 1539, and he basically walks all around the southeast. Him and all his people, they basically terrorize Native Americans, a total mess, but he's one of the people who really chart out the southeast. He also died after he crossed the Mississippi. You know, look, being an explorer back in those days was a pretty dangerous job. You know, you leave Spain and you're like, "Bye, honey. See you never," because I'm probably gonna die, because that was pretty much what happened. You're a big risk taker. You know, they were the Evel Knievels or the Super Dave Osborns of the day. So fast forward, this area is Native Americans for a very long time. Florida is considered a backwater. One of the Native American tribes was the Seminoles in this area. And in the early 1800s, the Seminoles were the ones that the United States was trying to boot out of here. They called them the Seminole Wars. There was 3 different wars against the Seminole Native Americans. In fact, Andrew Jackson kind of made a name for himself in the first one. And it was really brutal because the Seminoles were like, "We're not going anywhere." And in fact, one of the forts for that war was built around here. It was called Fort Harrison, right around this area. There was also Fort Brooke in what is today Tampa. I talked about that one in my Tampa video. Look at that. I'm putting all these you can cross-ref, as the kids say, right? And you had the Armed Occupation Act passed in 1842. This basically said to people, "Hey, if you come over here, take up arms, we'll give you 160 acres. 160 acres of land, baby. All you got to do is come here, set up a little place, maintain it, and agree to fight the Native Americans." Believe it or not, a lot of people took that claim. Over 1,200 people claimed over 200,000 acres of land in central and southern Florida. That was one of the things that helped settle this area in the mid-1800s. That was back when, to gentrify an area, you had to really earn it and fight Native Americans. Back then, you had to set up a place and pick up a musket. Today, you just open a cupcake shop. But 1891, Clearwater is finally incorporated as a city. It was a big deal. 1891, right? 1897, Henry B. Plant, who helped design and build Tampa, builds his summer home out here, the Bellevue Biltmore. So it kind of got more of a name as a vacation spot. In fact, I used to vacation here as a kid. You know, coming from Tampa, very nice, very, very cool. But that's the original history of Clearwater. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty, baby, how it's slowly started to change and how Scientology got involved. So what do you think, Silvio? Should we go?
Let's do it.
I'm getting sunburned, baby. Let's go. All right, so enter a man named L. Ron Hubbard. Now, L. Ron Hubbard was actually the son of a Navy commander, eventually went into the Navy himself, and then he was injured, or at least spent time in a hospital, and credited some techniques that he developed with his knowledge of psychotherapy and Eastern religions. He credited these new techniques that he developed with helping him heal. When he left, one of the things he did was became a pulp fiction writer. You guys know the term pulp fiction, but it's basically like science fiction, westerns, but really cheap, quick, easy. So he got good at churning out stories. But in 1950, he took a little bit of a turn, and he published a book called Dianetics, which was pretty much like his philosophy on life. It was a mix of psychotherapy and other kind of ideas that he had about the unconscious. Thank you for driving through my shot. But one of the things he believed in there was that we are made up of two parts of our mind, right? The analytical side, which is your conscious, your ability to reason, your ability to think and approach the world and problem solving, and your reactive. And it's the reactive mind that you have all this stuff, what he called engrams, kind of accumulated over time from different traumatic experiences and events in your life that it is then your job to get rid of. And one of the things he believed was that there was a process called auditing, which you could use by talking out these things with someone else to eventually lift them. Sounds a lot like therapy, but he had this kind of technique developed, and then it was such a huge hit, this book, in 1950 when it came out, that different societies started springing up with people kind of putting his techniques into practice. He saw that it had a huge effect. He was going to take it a step further. One of the things he believed too was that once you got rid of all of these different engrams, you were clear. You go clear. And that was kind of the goal, but it was kind of the beginning of this movement towards more of a religion rather than a self-help technique. We already have Dianetics published. In 1952, L. Ron Hubbard publishes Scientology, A History of Man. At this time, he starts introducing new ideas and new concepts that create what we know today as the religion of Scientology. Right? One of these is the idea of thetans. We all are made up of thetans, which are basically our soul. And these things, starting around this time, transcend just our lifetime. So it does differ from psychology in that way, in that you pick up all of these engrams and things throughout your different lifetimes that go back millions of years. That's one thing. Another thing he introduces around this time is e-meters. So e-meters are basically these two like tin can type things. They are hooked up to this electronic reading thing, and you have someone who audits you using the e-meter from this point on, as opposed to before where you just kind of talk it out. So it becomes this more technical process where you need someone to actually know how to use it, right? This is one of the slight differences from what it was before. So you think of like any self-help, like Tony Robbins, right? Tony Robbins is a very fine line between what he does, which is, you know, charging people $10,000 to go to Hawaii and do trust falls while he goes his private jet. All he has to do is say, hey, all this transcends your life. This, you need certain clergy in my group to help you through this, and he becomes a religion. So L. Ron Hubbard kind of crosses this threshold in the 1950s. It was in 1954 that the Church of Scientology is officially incorporated in Los Angeles. Leave it to LA, baby. There must be something in the water over there. Or, you know, I guess all the leather in the bracelets that gets into people's bloodstreams or something that just makes it a hot spot for that kind of stuff. But other things kind of start happening at this time too. He starts taking in serious amounts of money for people to take these auditing courses, and they start taking in lots and lots of cash. So much so that in 1963, the FDA raids their offices to take some of these e-meters because they had been promised as these things to help you fix your life. And the FDA was like, yeah, that's not true. So they basically started doing that. Then in the 1960s, he moves to England and actually sets up the headquarters there at a place called St. Hill. Then England starts kind of looking into everything. Australia starts looking into them heavily and actually publishes the Anderson Report, which condemned Scientology as, I don't know, manipulative kind of force in that country because it had been spreading and it was so popular, right? Now, keep in mind also too, in 1966, there was an element introduced called the Fair Game Law. The Fair Game Law was basically L. Ron Hubbard saying that if you are a suppressive person, which is someone who were contrary to what Scientology was trying to do, they could come after you. You're fair game. They could come after you and sue the hell out of you, you know, even destroy you. In 1968, he basically went back on this idea of fair game, at least explicitly he did, but they say that he continued to practice it. Also in the 1960s, and one of the reasons why I'm here is all these boats. You get the nautical theme of Scientology because L. Ron Hubbard starts to live on a boat. He buys 3 massive ships. We're talking thousands of tons. These are massive, almost like mini cruise liners that he had that he would live on. One of them, the main one being the Royal Scotsman, which then was renamed the Apollo, but it was here that he came up with a lot of the other terms and concepts which are still used today. Different ideas as you ascend the bridge to total freedom, which is kind of the ladder of knowledge that you have to pay to ascend, by the way. L. Ron Hubbard starts to make a push towards the celebrity culture. He actually opens his first celebrity center in the late 1960s and starts courting the actors and directors and musicians through things like a famous acting coach that he had there. It was while he was on these ships that he started to kind of figure out what he wanted to do and where he wanted to dock the actual church, and that is how he stumbled on Clearwater. Not before he encountered certain enemies of the Church of Scientology. A famous one is Paulette Cooper. Paulette Cooper published the books The Scandal of Scientology in 1971. She was actually a student of religion, and she was just completely destroyed. They sued her 19 times. They went to her apartment. She'd just moved because she was getting harassed so much, and they actually assaulted her cousin who lived there instead of her. She moved into a more, I guess, official building with like a doorman and stuff to protect her. That didn't stop them from basically circulating a letter there to all her hundreds of neighbors saying to them that she was a prostitute with venereal disease. I guess give me the freaking letter to my neighbors saying I have a prostitute. I'd take that any day over 19 lawsuits. Jesus, that's gonna break you. Paulette Cooper was basically destroyed. They wanted to commit her to a mental institution. That was their goal. There was actually documents found in a raid in the 1970s, 1977, that exposed all this. This is all on the record stuff, and it was actually known as Operation Freakout, their response to her and her expose of the church. It was on the boats that he came up with the idea of Sea Org, which is still the clergy today. You see people walking around Clearwater, downtown Clearwater, in their kind of naval-like outfits, and it's called Sea Org. These people sign billion-year contracts to work as these people and get paid very, very, very little. And if they ever do leave, they are given a tab, basically, with all the services and things that were rendered in furtherance of their education that are now owed to the church, which is wild. Billion-year contract, baby. I guess the closest thing we have is, you know, when you get signed up for Amazon Prime. Good luck getting off that. That might as well be a billion-year contract. But yeah, so here, boats. We're about to find out how the city of Clearwater and the Church of Scientology met. All right, so this is where the two stories meet, the story of Clearwater and the story of Scientology. So in 1975, I told you that L. Ron Hubbard had been at sea for a while. He's looking for a place to kind of call his home, call Scientology its home. So he found a perfect candidate in Clearwater in that it was on the water, it was warm, and it was small enough to be able to, quote, take over. Now I say that because there were documents made public by a raid in 1977 that showed a lot of those plans for Clearwater. So in 1973, the Guardian Office of Scientology began a project called Operation Snow White to infiltrate government agencies, infiltrate law firms, infiltrate companies, all to protect the interests of Scientology. When the government found out, they were not happy. In fact, they raided in 1977 the offices of Scientology in 2 different cities and came out with over 48,000 documents, basically documenting all kinds of things from the doctrine to plans like what they called here Operation Normandy. Normandy. It's not very subtle, but those were the kind of plans they had for Clearwater to basically come here and take over. Part of that was buying up land. Now, actually the mayor at the time, his name was Gabe Casares, was quoted as saying, "I'm discomfited by the increased visibility of security personnel armed with billy clubs and mace employed by the United Churches of Florida. I am unable to understand why this level of secrecy is required by a religious organization." What he was referring to was this company, the United Churches of Florida, well, this nonprofit that was basically the front for the church buying up land in the area. But this was the move to kind of come in and set up shop here. And in the process, the people who covered it, for example, a woman named Bette Orsini at the St. Pete Times, a radio DJ, William Pointer, the chairman of the St. Pete Times, these people were all basically smeared and they were attacked because Scientology didn't want to be known and also didn't want any negative press whatsoever. Eventually they made themselves public as being the buyer, but only after Bet Orsini and other journalists were ready to basically make it public themselves anyway. Now, this is no joke either. Like, the way they basically smeared these people, for example, Gabriel Casares, the actual mayor, one of the things they did to him was they tried to sabotage his Congress run. He ran for Congress. They sabotaged his Congress run. They even, this is wild, they even staged a hit and run while he was in DC. They had his driver pretend to carry out a hit and run on another person hired by Scientology, and then they were going to pin it on Casares. And this is all from the records in that Operation Snow White document seizure. By the way, 11 people were actually indicted for that, including Mary Sue Hubbard, who was L. Ron Hubbard's wife. She was the head of the Guardian Office, and she was actually indicted and charged and convicted for what they did with Operation Snow White, which spanned for years. They basically sent people to get jobs and work at government agencies and law firms and would make photocopies, take pictures, steal documents from these places, all to protect the church. Pretty wild. But this is where the history of Clearwater meets the history of Scientology. Pretty neat. I'm roasting out here, so let's keep it moving. Okay, behind me is the first major purchase of the Scientologists here in Clearwater. This is, well, it was the Fort Harrison Hotel. So this building was built in 1926. In fact, Ransom Olds was one of the operators of the initial hotel. He was Oldsmobile, the car, Oldsmobile. Oh, look at that. Anyways, it was sold to the Church of Scientology in 1975, 76. And in fact, it wasn't the Church of Scientology. It was a group called United Churches of Florida that was created for the sake of buying up properties in Clearwater. And it was paid for in $2.3 million cash. Right off the bat, just boom, give me that thing. Which is a trend that would continue, how these buildings in the neighborhood and area are bought up even today. This building actually served initially as kind of the headquarters. Later on, they built the flag building, the actual superpower building, which I'll talk about in a second, but this was initially where they would come. Also, little aside, little trivia, lighten it up a little bit, this is where the Rolling Stones wrote "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." When they were passing through Florida on their tour, they stayed here and they came up with the song there. But this building is where Scientologists who visit Clearwater come, and they'll stay here. In 1995, a woman died inside named Lisa McPherson. It was a big, I guess, stain on the relationship between the city and the church at the time. There was a big lawsuit. She was held there for a bunch of days. They don't know why she wasn't allowed to go to the hospital. When she finally was, she ended up dying. A big mess. Also in 1997, there was 161 911 calls recorded in 11 months, which is a lot for one place. Unless that place is like, you know, Diddy's house or something. I guess that's really the only other way. But that's a lot. The other building right nearby is the old Bank of Clearwater building. That building dates back to 1918. It's a landmark building here and is now the info center for the Church of Scientology since 2015, but it was bought around the same time for $550,000. Now, the woman who was, I guess, behind looking into all these was a woman named Bet Orsini. She worked for the St. Pete Times, and she's the one who, in 1976, was digging through all this and pushed, eventually, the church to announce its own sales. And this is kind of what the mayor, who I had mentioned already, Gabe Casares, was referring to. It was very secretive. There was no phone number for the little front companies that were created to buy these things, all paid for in cash. And I guess his whole thing was, why do you need to be so secret about everything? I guess the church would say because they don't want to be persecuted, but at the same time, it's kind of this impasse. The city needs to know what's kind of going on, right? Anyways, that's what happened. Also, by the way, the St. Pete Times, for a lot of their articles in the 70s, won a Pulitzer for its coverage of the church and its move here to Clearwater. You can check those out. I'll put a link there in the description, you know. And Bet Orsini, as did a lot of people back then, she paid the price. They went after her. They tried to, smear her. They tried to smear her husband, who was the director of a nonprofit. They tried to go back and claim that he had failed to pay fees and was operating illegally, and it was a whole thing. Like, they came after you, man. Remember, fair game rule. So if you wrote about them, you were gonna get chased down. So remember, don't sue me. I'll settle out of court for a nice Waffle House breakfast. That's my legally binding. All right, anyways, let's keep moving. All right, right, and this here behind me is 215 South Fort Harrison Road, and this is actually the Flag Building. Called the Flag Building because the flagship was the Apollo. They moved the headquarters here, and this is the newest one, 2013. Well, it's called the Superpower Building too, because one of the things it was built for was to provide the superpower rundown for the advanced levels of Sea Org and Scientologists who wanted to keep ascending, right? Remember, these are big draws, so the fundraising for this building actually pulled in around 145 million for it, even though the building was only projected to cost around 80 million at most, 377,000 square feet. Keep in mind, Clearwater is the biggest moneymaker for the Church of Scientology, which has assets they estimate around $3 billion. This is a big company, big corporation really, and it's all tax exempt as a religion, even though they keep pulling in more and more money, and it costs a lot of money to keep ascending. Right across the street from it is the Fort Harrison Hotel, which I had mentioned earlier. In the 1990s, actually, the Scientology magazine listed as one of its goals for the 2000s to make Clearwater, Florida, the first Scientology city in the world, and that's kind of where it's all headed. We're going to talk here a little bit about how they're doing that in a second, but this shows you that this is kind of the center of the spiritual side of Scientology. Superpower building. Pretty ominous sounding. All right, and finally we're going to talk about the present day. I'm actually standing in front of 600 Cleveland Street. This is one of the many buildings owned in this area. Since 2017, 92 of about 185 buildings owned around here, maybe more even now because this article dates back to 2019, are owned by either the Church of Scientology or Scientologists, parishioners. Tom dnyc, who used to be head of real estate holdings and other things for the church, who since defected, has said that that constitutes pretty much being owned by the church because the church owns its parishioners. It isn't like there's different levels of commitment. If you're in the church, you're whole hog, is what he says. So this is one of the buildings that's owned. And one of the issues they've been having is the city has different plans for developing the downtown, but obviously the church and its parishioners have other plans, and they've butted heads on multiple occasions. I mean, as recent as April 2024, a well-known developer here who is a Scientologist bought up a $58 million portfolio with 8 different buildings and properties all in around this area. So it gives you an idea from 2017, which is when this huge push started. One of the reasons they say is because there was a huge disagreement between the city and David Miscavige, who is the actual leader of Scientology. Today, they've started scooping up buildings. So from 2017 to 2019, $103 million were spent buying up properties in and around downtown Clearwater. So this is one of the things, I guess, that they're trying to do is kind of set up a kind of buffer between it and the regular people of Clearwater and the surrounding areas. And many of these buildings are bought and properties are bought in cash by secret buyers and for way more than they're worth, actually, which is one of the ways they can make sure they get what they want. It really does seem like a calculated plan to literally own the town and downtown of Clearwater. So we'll see what comes of it, but this is one of the things that they are kind of currently sparring with the church from the city at the moment. And you have one of the examples here. You have garages, you have buildings, you have restaurants. These are all the kinds of things that are being bought up today. This is all within the last 10 years, really, that it has been ramped up. So we'll see where it all leads. It makes me think of Orlando, Florida, for example, where Walt Disney went in and chose Orlando as kind of the site for his Magic Kingdom because of all of the power it granted him and his ability to kind of take it over all at once. You can't do that in New York City or Los Angeles. You can only do that in a place that doesn't have as many people and isn't as developed, especially when you have the money that organizations like the church have. Actually, a lot of this was found by the Tampa Bay Times, who did its own investigation and was able to find all these numbers because none of it was really that public to begin with. So, yeah. Well, we covered a lot there, didn't we? Oh man, we learned a lot. Silvio, how did you feel about that? Did you learn a good amount?
I feel really good about it.
Yeah, I don't sense an ounce of sarcasm in your voice, so that's a good thing. We covered the early history of Clearwater. We covered also, a little bit of the history of Scientology and its arrival here in Clearwater. We covered some of the more recent developments and a little bit of Tampa and St. Pete in the process. What a story, huh? Guys, if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Guys, if you enjoyed it, check out the Patreon. Huge help. That's how I fund these things. It's how, it's how we pay for our Cuban sandwiches at La Teresita. But yeah, guys, I don't know what else to tell you. We did it. The fog came back for our outro. Isn't that weird? Huh? It wasn't there for the whole shoot, but it just came back for the outro. All right, well, thank you guys for watching. See y'all later. Sick. Yeah.